Right. I guess what we were talking about is this marriage that everybody loves, that everybody craves for, that everybody wants to be. How does it turn into pain, struggles, stress, and separation? Live this evening with MUSAWO, JUSTINE, KIGOZI, we will be discussing this. There's a lot of issues as to why people separate in relationships, and we could spend a whole day talking about this. But what's important today is the feeling in the middle of this sandwich. Between two people in a relationship, there is a husband and wife. But those two people give birth to children. And what we tend to forget is the impacts this separation brings on children. We tend to spend so much time struggling between who is taking the house, who is taking the car, who is taking the money, how are we sharing everything. We spend so much time struggling with that instead of focusing on emotional regulation of these children and how this separation is impacting on them. Apologies, because my first video was upside down, so I didn't realize, and we had to start again. So I guess this is a little bit better, but we'll be working on the quality of how we do this. Importantly today is the children in between a separation. It's very interesting because the statistics from United Nations show that divorce is dropping rapidly from the 90s. So the number of divorce, according to the UN, is dropping. However, the question will be, is that because not very many people are getting married today? So is it because there's a lot of people out there cohabiting and not legally married, so their statistics cannot be caught in between this? We have to remember that even people living together and not legally married are having children. But these children are not part of the statistics that we've been talking about. So the UN is showing that divorce is dropping rapidly. However, there's research that shows that there's an increase in separation. So there's a lot of people separating in relationships, but we cannot account for them because they are not legally married. So the government does not know about them. Global health doesn't know about them, so we don't have a global picture of who is separating and because they are cohabiting. If you're cohabiting, you're not legally accounted for. But if you're legally married and you divorce, we've got the picture, and that's the picture we've got. People these days, there's evidence that people living together as cohabiting, but they're not married, but they still have children. So while the UN is telling us that divorce is dropping and there's not a lot of people being affected by this, actually separation, the rate is higher because there's a lot of people living together but not married and they have children. So what's the impact of separation on these children? What happens to these children when we are separating in relationships? While we spend so much time fighting for cars, for houses, for the money, what's going on with these children? Do we really sit down and find out how they feel about this? Now, I come from a culture where children do not question parents. Parents know it all and we don't question them in my culture. However, a child is developing. So literature and statistics shows that the impacts, the psychological impacts on a child depend on how old this child is. The age of a child is very important. So in fact, literature is showing that many people who separate when children are younger their children are not very much impacted on. So children who are much younger, because they're developing in their emotions, will not be very much affected like teenagers. So teenagers and children apparently from the age of 10 and above tend to struggle more. It can be younger than that, but actually that's what research is telling us, that those children struggle more. What do they struggle with? They struggle with making sense of what's happening. I mean, today, mommy and daddy are here. Tomorrow, it could be only mommy. And how do they make sense of that? It could be only daddy. How do they make sense of that? Separation causes bitterness, anger, frustration. It's not pretty. It's not pretty. It's very difficult when people are separating. But when your child disappears to the bedroom, what do you think they're going through? While you're screaming downstairs and trying to work out who is going where, what is your child going through? We never tend to check in with that at all. We never tend to check in with the kids. What happens to the children? They struggle with emotional regulation. They could become angry. They become impulsive. They struggle in education at school. They struggle because there's a change, a life-changing event in their lives. A parent walking out of their lives. Some of them feel rejected. Some of them blame themselves that they are the cause of all this because we are not explaining to them what's happening. I'm not saying that separation never happens. It happens. But how do we handle it to be able to support our children? We need to safeguard our children through these emotions. Some of the statistics show that the worst hit children are the ones that actually have to move. So your parents separate and you have to move home. You have to move school. Sometimes you have to move country, which means you're making new friends. You're starting your whole life again. So the literature out there shows that the children's life is turned upside down. How do we as parents support our children to contain these emotions? How do we support them to manage what is going on? Because there's two lives to live. I like a researcher who recently said, you can live a beautiful life or you can live a suffering life. So a beautiful life does not mean you don't go through struggles. It means you go through struggles, but you can regulate your emotions according to the struggles you're going through. While a suffering life is one of a baseline of depression, where you cannot regulate your emotions. You're constantly angry. You're carrying 2016 into 2019. You're carrying the whole world in your mind. When children go through such emotions and you don't sit down to explain what is going on, they cannot make sense of what's going on, and they carry their childhood into adulthood. And the research shows that the prognosis is, in the long run, they are depressed adults. They are self-harming. They are suicidal because of what happened years ago. Childhood experiences, very important in this scenario. What do we do when we separate? It's difficult. We are crying. We are bitter, we are angry, but we've got to be able to contain what we are going through. Seek psychological support if we need to, but we cannot be doing these things in front of our children. We cannot be arguing, we cannot be talking about our exes bitterly in front of our children. We cannot use our children as weapons. You will not see your dad. You will not speak to your mom. You will not do that. We cannot do that as adults. We are damaging these children for life. we are damaging them for life. They are nothing to do with what is going on. We can't use them as weapons. We must be able to manage our misunderstandings and let the children develop into adults who can then make sense of what happened. Because I'm absolutely sure in their adulthood there will be separations too. It might not be them, but they might evidence it. And then they may think, well, what happened to my parents after all is not foreign. It happens to to most people. But if you don't help them make sense of situations, then they cannot regulate their emotions. Some young children, when parents separate, they go through trauma. And this is evidenced by their behavior regressing. Children regress. They start behaving younger than they should. A 10-year-old starts to behave like a 5-year-old. How do you see this? Evidence shows bedwetting. Children who never used to wet their beds will start bedwetting. Nightmares. They start having nightmares. They develop insomnia. They cannot sleep. Sometimes the struggle is that when we separate with our partners, we move on very, very quickly. So a man separates with their wife today and next week they're getting married. A woman separates with their partner today and they're getting married next weekend or in a month's time. You've not given time to your children to work out what's happened, to make sense of what's happened. They are actually meeting new family members. They are meeting new people who are going to be part of their circle. They are meeting new relatives. So how quickly do we move into a new relationship after separation? Do we give our children a chance to make sense of what's happened before we step into the next relationship? Children get overwhelmed by the change. They're already making new friends, possibly in a new school, and they're already meeting a new dad or a new mom. How quickly do we move into relationships? If your child is too young to explain separation to them, give them an answer that when they grow up, they'll think, oh, that makes sense. Don't try to dodge your children's questions and give them answers that do not make sense. Give them an answer that is equivalent to their age, but at least they will make sense of it when they grow up. If you are a dad or mom out there and you've got arrangements of picking up your child and seeing your child at a certain time, be there. Pick them up. See them on time. Don't pretend like they don't exist. Keep the arrangements. Give them the consistency that they need. Because we all believe in love, but it may not be the fairy tale that we all want it to be. So while you're going through separation in your relationship, try and think about the children in the middle. Try and think about the children in the middle because they're the adults for tomorrow. They are the adults for tomorrow. And do not let them turn into a suicidal child, a child who self-harms, a depressed child because of your actions. We need to think about our actions during separation. As I said before, there's a lot of issues that cause separation. But again, from the research that we've got, the United Nations again says the biggest cause of separation is financial reasons. So most people separate for financial reasons. And sometimes a child comes into your life and you're not financially stable to support this child and the family that you've got into, and it causes a lot of issues. There are other issues, a lot of issues, but please do think about the child in the middle and make your decisions according to the children in the middle. People will always separate, people will always divorce, but it does not mean that the children have to suffer, because the impacts are serious and sometimes are not great for mental health and well-being of your children. Thank you very much. Justine NAKIMULI KIGOZI.